Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Well, everyone, we are excited to be here today. I'm so excited that Logan Densley is here with us. Logan, thanks for driving all the way from Orem.
I'm so grateful to be here, Mark.
To Provo. So Logan and I connected in an interesting way. My grandchildren are the age of his children, and so last year, our grandson and your son were on the same football team that our son was coaching, and that was fun. And we got to have a lot of at least a few conversations about some mental health things, and I remember having some great conversations with you, Logan. So thanks so much for coming. Tell us about yourself. We want to learn about you.
Well, I am an LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker. I probably jokingly started in the field when I was in my teenage years, talking with my wife about back when I would date. We'd talk about our dates I went on in high school, and they would turn into therapy sessions, unbeknownst to me. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think I've always been doing therapy for people. And so I went to BYU, UVU, and the U of U.
Yeah.
The trifecta. I have several degrees, and I have unintentionally ended up becoming a therapist. My intent, even in getting my therapy degree, was to go become an administrator and run facilities.
Right.
I've worked at facilities like Cirque Lodge, one of the top drug and alcohol treatment facilities in the nation. Steps Recovery, run by good friends of mine, and they do a wonderful job there as well. And I've worked with adolescents and teenagers. A large part of my beginning of my career, that's where I started out, working in troubled teen programs and working with kids who were adopted. And then I went out to a facility in Missouri called Change Academy Lake of the Ozarks. It was a facility with reactive attachment kids.
Yeah.
But over the time, as I kind of evolved with my career, I got more and more working with, specifically with pornography, marriage, pre-marriage counseling, marriage counseling.
Right.
And any therapist in the field works with depression, anxiety, addiction. But specifically, originally, pornography came up as an issue, and I shied heavily away from it and said, I don't want to
deal with this, yeah.
And then everybody who walked through my office door just about was having some impact from it, and I thought, well, I got to go at this, and
right.
It turned out I was pretty good at it.
Yeah.
So we kind of been doing that for a while, and currently I'm over at a facility that I started with my business partner, Mike, called Veritas Mental Health, and we're on 8th North and Orem, and we've been doing that since 2014.
Yeah,
so about a decade.
That's so great, and you're right, because I'm in the same field as you, and you start to have to learn. You need to learn to do things that you thought I never really wanted to do this, right? And pornography's been so prevalent. I used to tell, when we were in Dallas, I would tell people that I could probably quit doing anything else and just see pornography
100%.
Clients all day, and I would stay busy.
Yeah, I was talking to one of my friends who's a bishop, and bishops will sometimes help out with mental health.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm anticipating for the first time in the history of our stake to put more money towards mental health issues this year than I am towards helping people cover rent and mortgages and other expenses that sometimes the church will help out on specific occasions. And the pornography is a large part of that
right.
problem. So
yeah, this is a great transition piece, because it's Joseph Smith who says, well, this is Ezra Taft Benson quoting Joseph Smith, who says that the plaguing sin of this generation is sexual immorality, is what he said. And then Joseph Smith said that this would be the source of more temptation, more buffeting, and more difficulties for the elders of Israel than any other. And I just think we obviously live in that day, right, where that
Absolutely.
prophecy is being fulfilled. And so right now, there's data out there, Logan, and I know you're aware of a lot of it. And what, how much of this we can trust and how accurate it is all the time. Because, you hear things, Meg Meeker wrote a book on raising boys, and she's like, oh, every young man has been exposed to pornography. Every teenage boy, it's like 100%. Well, that's seeing something and being addicted to something are two different things. But
absolutely.
Here's Forbes magazine. Global profits from pornography, $56 billion a year. And this study was 10 years ago, 40 million Americans visiting pornographic sites regularly, 20% of men viewing pornography at work. The only two words entered in search engines more than sex are and the. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. And then BYU does a study about. I mean, this is probably old. It's about 15 years ago, but it's good because it's LDS people, right? And it's college age. 86.2% reported viewing pornography during the past 12 months, and that means one visit, up to pornography or 100, right? But 48% of the men reported viewing pornography weekly. 1 in 5 adult men reported viewing pornography every day or nearly daily, so that's 20%. And then 2/3 of male students said pornography use is acceptable. So it's becoming more acceptable. And Logan, you and I know that some of the data is showing us that now women and girls are having just, I don't want to say just as much, but they're struggling in this area too.
Well, I think that partially because we're adjusting some of the way that we're collecting some of that data. I think originally we were looking for the traditional concept of pornography as a Playboy magazine or some type of video online streaming as pornography.
Right.
And what we're realizing are things like 50 Shades of Grey, we call them naughty novels that are titillating in some way, are also of a pornographic nature. One of the things that we tend to look at is those statistics is we try to be pretty leery of trying to attach that too strongly because often those statistics are very heavily driven by an agency and they're wanting this specific outcome, and so they I don't trust them.
They want to scare us a little bit, right?
Unfortunately, I think that with this one, I know there was a presentation by BYU a few years ago at Education Week where they went through and talked about, we were surprised that pornography wasn't about sex, it was about stress management. And then they went in to talk about around 86% of the young men at BYU were having at least a problem once a month, and close to 54% of the young women. And that was over a decade ago that presentation was given.
Right.
And I think that it's led into a trend that we have, which is the market's tapped out for men. So pornography producers are now having to pivot to grow their market by adjusting and trying to make pornography that's more appealing to women. And it is appealing to women, but not in the same way it appeals to men. So they have to tell a different story to get women lassoed into this industry. And so so statistics I'm always a little leery of, but I think that the general trend we can say is this is a problem. It's not going away. And we don't talk to our children anymore of, we need to stay away from this. It's what do you do when you encounter it? Right. Because the odds of encountering it is almost 100% at this point.
Yeah. Oh, I would totally agree. So Logan, based on everything that we've just shared, it certainly sounds like there's a significant prevalence of pornography in our society and even in our LDS culture.
100%. I think that the what we have to remember is that pornography is anything that is exciting those sexual, natural, and divine sexual purposes and drives in any way. And that turns into TV shows. There's hardly a TV show that you can watch anymore that doesn't have some form of sexuality that is trying to elicit a response. And so it is in our music, it is in our media, it's everywhere at this time. And that is concerning because it's awakening passions and desires in younger age individuals than would typically be addressed. And so it's creating some unique challenges.
Right. And that's what, as I've researched this, once again, I mentioned our LDS culture, but just if on a Christian level, that the research tells us that when it comes to being faithful in a religion, that those who are faithful in a religion, in different religions across the country, the rates of pornography use are about the same compared to those who aren't even that religious, right?
And I actually like that statistic, and I know that sounds a little bit unusual. I like that people understand that if I'm struggling with something, I can stay committed to my convictions without feeling like I have to leave the room.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that, but I think it also shines a light, and there's different ways to interpret that. But the way I like to focus on that today, especially as you'll see when we go through this, is that I love knowing that Christian men and women who are struggling with this problem are still trying to stay close to their faith and trying to keep their convictions as they struggle to apply the atonement and repentance to the process.
Yeah, I love that you're looking at it in that direction. I like that. That's a good interpretation. Logan, I've heard you say before that when it comes to pornography treatment, that we're often thinking about it the wrong way, maybe focused on the wrong thing. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, when it comes to pornography and other addictions, quite frankly, we tend to get really focused on the behavior.
Yeah.
And it's easy to do that because it's there in front of us. It's what we want to stop.
And it's in neon lights. Right?
It is literally, it's the moth to the flame, right?
Yeah.
And in an analogy, as I work with individuals working on these issues, I talk about the dragon and the fire.
Yeah.
And the fire is the pornography issue. It's the eating disorder. It's the depression. It's the anxiety. It's
the loneliness, the stress. Yeah.
Those are the things that are symptoms of the underlying issue, which I call the dragon. And when we want to really address the issue, we work on slaying the dragon. I had a young man come into my office. Well, he wasn't so young. He'd had a drinking addiction. And he had just gotten arrested for the 7th time for DUI. He didn't have a driver's license anymore, but he'd still drive.
Wow.
And he came in, he had such a pervasive drinking problem, and I said, so you're here to get ahead of the courts? He laughed and said, yeah. And I said, okay, cool. So let's just take you where you're at. And he said, well, I need to stop drinking, right? And I said, well, how much are you drinking? He told me, I said, no, don't stop drinking. And he looked at me kind of puzzled. He goes, I've been going to rehabs for, over a decade. What do you mean? And I said, I don't want you to stop drinking. And he said, why? I said, because you're going to die. You're drinking so much. That's one thing you can die from is going cold turkey when you have that much alcohol. I said, and I'll be honest with you, drinking is not your problem. I said, here's your homework. I want you to drink as much as you need to and not as much as you want to. So if you need a beer tonight, have a beer. But here's your rule. And this is a really unusual, and I know it sounds out there. But I said, here's your rule. And this is a guy who I'm specifically working with who I know he's been through the 12 steps a dozen times. He's
7 DUIs, right? I mean,
seriously,
he's setting records out there.
Yeah, he's got 25 years of addiction.
Yeah,
and I said, you're addressing the underlying issues in a way that are not solving any of your problems. So for every beer you have, I want you to have a bottle of water. And if you want a shot, then you have to have a bottle of water. So go to Costco, grab a big bottle. Yeah. And I said, and we're not going to pay much attention to the drinking. I just want you to follow that rule and that rule alone. And remember, this isn't a challenge to see how drunk you can get. And within a very short time, he came in and he'd stopped smoking. His drinking had gone down to about a beer every other night. And we weren't talking 12 steps. We weren't talking addiction because it wasn't the issue.
Right.
And when we focus on that, it's like focusing on the elephant in the room. If I say it's a pink elephant and we talk about, well, the pink elephant has this, pink elephant has, don't think about a pink elephant and keep repeating pink elephant. We think about the pink elephant.
Yeah.
Pornography is very much the same way. We tend to get focused on the wrong issue, which is it's not about the pornography. Pornography is the attempted solution to the problem, not the underlying issue.
Right.
But as an LDS man, I get that pornography is an issue. It's just not the one that we're going to get a lot of traction working with. And if you want any evidence of that, talk to any wife or parent who's trying to force their spouse or child to stop looking at pornography and see how that goes.
Right. And usually not real well. In my metaphor, Logan, we're picking the weeds and we're not getting the root, right? And so we know those weeds just grow right back when that happens. And so one of the things I'll say to people in my counseling work is, okay, let's try to identify what you're medicating. You're medicating something right now, right? So
absolutely.
Let's get to the root of that. And even for teenagers, right? There's usually something that they're medicating. Would you say?
Yeah, and one of the things that I find interesting is I had a young man come into my office. He had a little bit of a porn problem. He was looking at porn about once a week for 5 minutes. He was Victoria's Secret magazine. Right? Yeah. So very we call softcore, but it was still of sexual nature. And within about a month, he had stopped that. And his bishop was super excited. His parents were super excited, and I was super upset. And nobody understood why. And he came into my office, and I said, "Well, how are we doing?" We checked on pornography, and I didn't catch it for about 2 sessions. But on the third session, when he didn't have any issues, I go, "You had no issues." We went like we're at zero. I anticipate when I'm working with clients, they're going to have slip-ups because I need that data. I want to know what happened before the slip-up.
Right.
And he said nothing. He said, "I've been doing great." And I said, "Well, has anything changed?" He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, are we like eating more food? Are we watching more TV? And he's like, "Well, I got an Xbox. I'm playing some video games now." I said, "Well, is that new?" He says, "Well, I didn't care about it much more before, but since I've stopped pornography, I'm playing more." And I go, "About how much time a day?" And he says, "Oh, well, about 3 or 4 hours a day."
Yeah.
And I went, "Ooh, this has gone the very wrong direction. We've got 20 plus hours a week now that we're wasting instead of 5 minutes once a week."
Yeah.
And the parents and the bishop didn't quite understand that at first. And then I explained to him, "Look, these are maladaptive coping mechanisms. This is a self-soothing process. I need to know what he's trying to soothe about.
Right.
And detaching him from reality through a video game is not going to get me to a solution. It's just playing whack-a-mole. We just moved the ball.
Yeah, totally.
So we ended up, saying, hey, we got to limit that a little bit more with the video game. And then the other underlying issues, like the root, we were able to expose some of those roots and get to what was driving that behavior.
Right. And so that's a great message, I think, for all who are listening today, is let's help those loved ones who are engaged in pornography let's help them identify what the root is, and then work on that root.
100%. And I think if there's anything that your listeners take away today from this message, is that do not focus on the pornography.
Yeah.
Pornography is not the real issue, and I know it's an issue, and it's not a good issue, but it's an issue. But if the more we focus on that, the longer it's going to be a problem.
Right, exactly. So Logan, here's another kind of thought for you. I was actually surprised as I started treating people with pornography addictions back in the early 2000s, how people were assessing it, right? And here were parents locking down everything that they could, and then finding out that some of these young men in this case were accessing it through like a video game system or whatever. It's pretty amazing how skilled they are at finding ways to get at this, right? And so, how sneaky can teenagers be when it comes to assessing pornography?
Oh, I think that's driven by the previous statement of don't focus on the pornography.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and I get it, as a parent, I'm terrified about something. My natural knee-jerk reaction is to turn my house into Fort Knox.
Right.
Let's lock everything down. I'm hiding the modem at night. And I kind of smile and go, that's just never going to work. When we look at substance abuse, what happens is the harder it is to attain the drug, the more they ritualize it.
Yeah. Okay.
So what happens is before they even get the heroin, they're getting high because the process and the struggle to get the heroin becomes part of the addiction.
Yeah.
And so I try to explain it that way, because the more difficult we make it for our children to access pornography, the more they're going to get ingenuity to work with them. And I think part of the funniest one,
it just makes them smarter, right?
It makes them work for it. And then, but the part of that is it turns it into a ritual now. And now that makes the addiction makes it more of addiction. In youth, I tend to not use the word addiction.
Right.
Even with young men, young women, I tend to say it's an abnormal sexual behavior that's getting a little out of control, because it doesn't meet a lot of the criteria of addiction in youth. Even if it's a lot, it's not impacting their lives in a lot of ways. They're still passing school.
Yeah,
they don't have the full.
They don't have to worry about. They didn't lose the money at the casino,
right.
So that they can't pay their mortgage that month, right?
And so as we don't think about it as addiction, we look at it as what their behavior is doing. As we hyper focus on that and lock everything down, it just moves the ball a little further away that they have to work for it. So the best one we had was the parents locked everything down, internets, passwords, codes, so forth. And the young man had an old DVR in the house that was a DVD player, player that the parents didn't know had a rudimentary web search engine on it. And he didn't care how much they locked it down. He was looking at porn every time they left the house.
Yeah.
And when they made the work that much harder, the harder the work is for something, the better the reward feels, at least momentarily. And so we call them maladaptive coping mechanisms. Yeah. And my business partner found out that food is sometimes that for me. I like sugar.
I'm addicted to food. I'll admit it.
Yeah, and so he messed with me one time. He bought these things that in my youth were a problem for me. They were called Little Debbie's, and they're not a huge problem, but the Little Debbie oatmeal pie. Yeah. So he bought those one time, and I ate the whole box in one day at our office. We provide snacks at our office, and I ate the whole box. Literally, it was like an hour later. We went back up, and they were gone. Yeah. And I just had a stressful day, and so I just ate them all. And he didn't say anything to me, but he went and bought 5 boxes. And within 2 days, I'd eaten them all again. And the next time, he went and bought 5 more boxes. And within about a month, I didn't want them anymore. Yeah. And then he told me, he said, I had a bet with my wife that I could break you of eating those if
By saturation.
By making it so easy to get myself involved in it, I was able to walk away from it really easy. And I just looked at those and went, ugh.
Yeah.
And pornography is not the same, but the concept is still true that if we make it super difficult, we're going to find ingenuity. Lock down the internet, they'll get a cell phone from a friend or on Facebook Marketplace, and they'll be jumping on the neighbor's Wi-Fi.
Right.
They will figure it out, but this goes back to they are accessing as much pornography as they need to soothe their hurt.
Yeah.
Just like the alcoholic. I said, drink as much as you need, not as much as you want. And by doing that, it was able to help him identify what he really wanted to work on or what he needed to work on as opposed to what he thought he needed to work on.
Yeah. Logan, I'm going to share 2 experiences with you and you can respond. One of them is just to confirm what you just said. We became aware years ago of a young man in the neighborhood who had figured out how to hack on to all the families in the cul-de-sac, so to speak, their Wi-Fi, because his parents had locked everything down at the house, but he just figured out a way. And it's just, if people want to find it, right, they will. I mean, that's for sure. But here's the story that I want to share with you, and I'm going to keep the people in the story anonymous. But was talking to a former mission president not too long ago, and he felt pretty good about this. What he had done on his mission is that every missionary was given an iPad, their own iPad, and they were able to track it. And what they learned is that in the mission field, the percentage of missionaries engaged in pornography went up. I mean, it went up pretty high. And so then what he did is he decided, you know what, they're going to share an iPad. We're going to take half of the iPads back. Each companionship just gets an iPad. And pornography went way down. So pretty cool, right? They call him in after he comes home from his mission because they're having like this focus group of mission presidents talking about this pornography issue. And they have this mission president share this novel thing that he did of having them share an iPad. And, once again, you would have thought, this sounds so good. This is great. I'm not going to identify the apostle, but after the meeting, one of the apostles who was in the meeting called him over and said, I actually think what you did was a horrible idea. And the mission president was puzzled, right? And he said, what do you think where's the first place these missionaries are going? Not even after they get released, after they get off the airplane, where's the first stop? Verizon. In other words, they're going to get their cell phone. And so the idea was that if we're not teaching them how to manage themselves, because for most of their life, right, they're going to have to figure this out on their own. They're not going to have someone standing over their shoulder, double checking everything that they do on the iPad. But I think this speaks in a way to what you're talking about, is we've got to find a way to manage ourselves and govern our hearts.
Absolutely. I think I had a wife come in one time, and she locked down the house.
Yeah.
And
you said Fort Knox, right?
Yeah, it was Fort Knox. I mean,
yeah.
At night she turned off the. I mean, it was pretty intense actually.
Yeah.
And I kind of said, okay, let me ask you a quick question. I said, we're going on this idea that I know this is new, that pornography isn't the problem, but let's just go with this. I looked at the young man and said, how many times a week were you looking at pornography before she did all this? He says about 3 or 4 times a week. And I said, and now she's been doing this for about a year. How many times did you look at pornography? And he said 3 times.
Uh-huh.
And I smiled and I said, I want you to learn this really important lesson. No matter what you do, right now he's learned that this soothes the problem for him. And you trying to own it and control it is ruining your life, not his.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
because she's become the policeman, right?
Right. And she's robbing him of the opportunity. Instead of turning towards them and saying, how can I support you with this issue? She was trying to control the issue. And she was trying to rob him of the self-development that was necessary for him to overcome the struggle. And I try to tell all my clients, I'm not here to get you to quit looking at pornography. I'm not your dad and I'm not your bishop.
Yeah.
Okay? My job is going to teach you how to connect.
Yeah.
And that's the underlying message of what I teach all my clients is connection. But when I get connected, my pornography use, my alcohol use, my eating disorder, it reduces. Does it go completely away? I hope so, but I try to make sure that's not the expectation. The analogy I use from the scriptures is Paul with a thorn in his side.
Yeah.
And I say, some thorns are going to be there the rest of our lives, but we want to make progress on them. And so when a husband or a wife doesn't own their partner's pornography addiction, when a parent doesn't own their child's pornography addiction, and allows their child to work through that process, and parents turn to them instead of shaming and controlling, they turn to them in loving and supporting ways and inspiring them, that allows that individual to develop the skills and capacities to identify within themselves what those mechanisms are, and then we have growth. Then we have progress.
Logan, that's so good. And I always go back to the foundation piece of what we really want to do is turn people to Christ and to the Savior and get their strength there. And I'll just share another experience. I was literally just talking to a bishop of a young single adult ward, and he was talking about pornography, right, and the prevalence and how often he's dealing with that as a bishop. And he told me a great story, but he said that and by the way, you and I can relate to this because we've had this conversation with people before. But this young man said, Bishop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to text you every day, and I'm going to tell you how I'm doing. And hopefully you can respond back and give me some encouragement. And I love this. The bishop said, I'm not doing that. and I was kind of listening because I was curious what the bishop was going to say next. And he goes, because now you just made this my problem. I've got plenty of problems.
Yes. For those of you at home can't see, my eyes rolled when he said that. It was a hard eye roll. Yeah, 100%. We don't want to own other people's behaviors. Yeah. One of the analogies I'll share with husbands and wives that come in with struggles is, and I know this is an unusual perspective, but I've never had a husband come into my office and I've worked with women who have had some very severe pornography problems. I've never had a husband come into my office and feel that it's his fault or his responsibility that his wife has a porn problem. Yeah. It's never happened.
Right.
I'm sure there's somebody out there that feels like that. I've never met him yet. I've been doing this for a long time.
Right.
I've only met one or two wives who've walked into my office that haven't felt it was their fault.
Exactly. I would say the same thing.
And so I try to teach them, in the temple, we make covenants, eternal covenants, to be a helpmeet, to support, to strengthen each other, not to carry each other's crosses. Christ takes our cross up, and we take up his. And we, in that turning towards each other, I put my hands up towards each other, and I'll say, when we have struggles, we turn our hands towards each other. We want to learn to turn towards our partners and create oneness, and I'll interlock my fingers. And that oneness is what we are striving for in the scriptures and in our marriages and our families. We want to create oneness. And that oneness isn't owning your partner's sins or capacities. It's supporting them and loving them as they address their own issues. And taking that role of coach instead of cop, we're going to have much better outcomes. And freeing wives and mothers from the responsibility of these addictions that happen in their homes, because it can get very toxic, is a huge part of what I try to do.
Oh, Logan, that's so good. As you spoke, it reminds me of something I heard you say before, and something that I've had an experience with, where a wife turned to me and said, I just don't get this. I look better now than I've looked in 20 years. I've lost all this weight. I'm running marathons. I don't get it. And I'm looking at her, you're looking at her and saying, this has nothing to do with you. He was doing this when he was 11, 100%. And now he's 41 years old,
And I try to help. I actually, and I'm direct. I'm one of the things I do is very direct. I say to the wives, "You're gorgeous and you're amazing in bed. That's not the issue."
Yeah.
He has never looked at pornography because of you. And what I mean by that, it's never been your fault. Yeah. What it has been potentially is you have been disconnected in some way, and then he went and made a choice with what to do with that. He could have gone to the gym. He could have eaten too much. He could watch some TV. He chose pornography because it's what was quick, easy, and what he learned when he was a young man, most often. And it's not your fault. Don't own it. But what you can do is get curious as to where did the disconnect happen. Right. Let's look for what happened the hour or day before he slipped up. And sometimes we get individuals who will white knuckle through for weeks all their temptations, and then have a binge, and then they come into my office and I go, I can't help you because there's 30 data points I didn't get because you white-knuckled through them.
Right.
And so it's an unusual approach, but it works.
That's great. Logan, as we talk about all this stuff, it just reminds me of this concept of betrayal trauma that we hear a lot of people talk about, especially in therapy circles. What are some of your thoughts on that?
I think that, and I don't want to offend anybody who has had a good experience with this idea, this concept, because I know they're out there, but I have almost a visceral response to it because I've worked with it for a while, where I've had individuals come in from other therapists that have used betrayal trauma, trying to unpack that, teaching a young woman, if she's caught her husband's doing this, that it's her trauma.
Yeah.
I think
she's been betrayed, and so now this trauma sets in, right?
Yeah, and I actually I don't like the vernacular. I don't like the approach, and probably most fundamentally because of this. I don't want a young woman or an older woman to feel traumatized by their partner's struggle
or choices, yeah,
and make it about them. I want to free her from that concept. And I say her because I've never had a man come in with betrayal trauma.
Yeah. Or
use that vernacular. And I think that one of the things I don't like about it is that it makes him into a perpetrator and her into a victim. And I don't want a woman to feel like she's a victim. I want her to feel empowered. I want her to feel strong. I want to keep her identity.
Yes.
And help her recognize that her partner's decisions are just that, his decisions. And the more we approach the idea of it's not about me, it's about him, or it's not my failed parenting. It's my young man or young woman is struggling with this because they've found out something.
And they're making a choice, right?
And it's their choices and that agency. I think that when we look at it from a bigger perspective, when I work with individuals who are sometimes leaving the church, they come in and they've got some visceral responsibility. They tell me the stories of their youth and how it was pretty rough and how regimented the home life was. And I'd smile and go, I might leave too if that had happened with me. I think sometimes as parents we forget. We are spirits that came from a heavenly Father where there was a war in heaven. And one of the fundamental things that we had to happen there was a fight over agency. And
yes.
if we see that we've rebelled against the idea of somebody trying to take our agency and make us do what's right, and then we come down here on earth and we try to force our children to do what's right by taking away their agency, we're going to have a similar outcome.
Right.
And so instead of making it about us, we allow them to own their own behaviors.
Yeah.
And instead of choosing betrayal trauma, I like them to take recognize that they are beautiful and amazing individuals, take comfort and confidence in their strength. And I've never had a husband come into my office and say, it's my wife's fault I look at pornography.
Right.
They come in ashamed, they come in embarrassed, and I tend to try to help the husbands get out of that as quick as possible. And then my second thing I try to do with the wives is try to free them from any ownership of that behavior and focus on the underlying issues, which usually results in some way, shape, or form to connection.
Yeah. Logan, I love that, and I love the idea that we're agents and that we're here to act and not be acted upon, not to be victims, and I think that's great. So here's another question for you. What are some of the pitfalls that parents can kind of fall into when addressing pornography issues in the home? What do you see parents doing?
I think the biggest issue is we've already touched on is try to control it.
The lockdown,
Lockdown, which I get it. I'm a dad. I got 5 kids, and man, when one of my children's making a mistake, I want to rush in. I want to stop it. I want to control it. I think a good analogy for this is my son, my oldest son. We didn't live in homes that had stairs, and so we went over to a friend's house when he was learning to walk. He was doing well with walking. They had some stairs. And they had a very low pitched stair, very long, very heavy shag carpet on their stairs, but it was a long set of staircase. So he'd done a limited experience with stairs. We were there at a party with several people, and I let him go up the stairs and just didn't protect him at all.
Yeah.
And some of the women in the room were very upset with me when he fell all the way down the stairs. He was up 4 steps, and
it was all carpeted.
It was not carpeted. It was shag, heavy pad carpeted. But he fell down the stairs once. He looked at me, started crying, ran over, gave him a hug, and said, "Go try again." Mm-hmm. And he went up the stairs again, and this time he made it about halfway, fell down again, stopped himself this time, didn't roll all the way down, and cried, came down, gave him a hug, said, "Doing great, go try again." And then he went up to the top, and we almost never had a problem after that because I let him fall and let him fail, and then let him know that I was a safe place to land.
Yes.
And then sent him back out there. With pornography, with these issues as parents, we need to make sure that we're not trying. I think a limited amount of control is a good idea.
Yeah.
Because we need to protect our homes. I think that's wise. I think that we get too out of control. We feel like there's issue out of fear instead of out of faith.
Yeah.
Have faith that this young man or young woman who chose right in the pre-existence, when faced with his real choice with proper education and support and love, can make the right choices here as well.
Yeah. I love that. What a great perspective. Faith versus fear, faith versus love, which means we would be trusting. And so I have heard you say this, Logan, before, and that is that you definitely want to loosen things up in terms of locking down a house with, let's say, with men, right? With 30, 40-year-old men. But with teenagers, would you say that, okay, let's go ahead and put some protections in place? What's your recommendation?
So I'll give examples of parents that I've really liked their approaches. I can't tell everybody what works for their family. That's where I'd say seek personal revelation and
Right.
seek counsel from your bishop and from professionals you trust. But one of my parents I've worked with that I thought had very successful outcomes, they landed on a spot eventually where during the week, their youth could have 1 hour of time on their iPads or screen time during the week, but on the weekend it was unfettered.
Yeah.
They could have complete access. And they had a basic internet control to stop from looking at, unexpectedly exposing themselves to images. But if they really wanted to look for it, they could not too hard find what they're looking for, and they found better results. And then when their young men or young women struggled, or their children struggled with this, they would try to let them know, instead of being upset, saying, "Hey, I know that's hard. We love you. Let's talk about how that felt for you," and walked through that. But that type of for somebody who's 40, I don't think there should be any controls on that. I think that we're trying to impose on that individual some growth that they need to experience for themselves, but we need to understand how to support them better.
Yeah.
So the effort, instead of trying to control it for, say, a wife trying to help a husband, instead of trying to control and have all his passwords to his phone, and one individual I know can't even get on the TV at the house without a password from his wife. And I went, just doesn't feel like agency.
Doesn't feel like a marriage either, does it?
It feels like a parent.
Yeah.
Is what that feels like. And I don't want a wife to feel like a parent. That's not a good look, and that doesn't lend to oneness in a marriage.
Yeah.
I think that one of the best things we can do is remember that we want to give enough rope to create problems or build bridges.
Yeah.
And that changes as we get older. At a young age, I think that there's a little bit more restriction on time, a little bit more restriction on internet access. But as they progress into high school and beyond, I think that a young man coming home from his mission, I think we have that general's easy internet protection on. But if he's going to mess up, let him know he can mess up, and let him know that we love him or her, and then try to support them as they try to understand what's driving that at the core. Not, from your analogy, not what's the weed, what's the root.
Yeah. And it's back to Joseph Smith, right? I teach correct principles. We have to let them govern themselves. I think there's an age for that, right? I mean, I love that you said post-mission, that's probably a good time or in college or whatever. I know that in our home, boy, we just didn't feel comfortable with our teenagers having those phones in their rooms. And I think, parents could be great, could be so helpful in making sure that those phones are turned in at night. In fact, our kid's greatest argument was, "Dad, this is my alarm clock." And we would say, "Look," in fact, I remember going to Walmart and buying 5 alarm clocks for a grand total of $15 or whatever. And so we can't fall for that, parents. We've got to be strong that way and be parents. But like you say, Logan, there's a process as they age and mature that we've got to turn them back over to them, right? And so
absolutely. And one of the things I probably should mention is the parent who did the hour during the week that they could watch on the weekends had unfettered. You want to play Xbox all weekend long, knock yourself out. But hey, this weekend we're going scuba diving up at the homestead. Oh, hey, this weekend we're going camping down to Flaming Gorge, and so they would fill the weekend time with family time. And so I like
such
that
a smart thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Logan, any other thoughts on this? Any things experiences or things you've heard, things that you're aware of that parents are doing to help their children?
Yes, there's one parent that comes to mind. They have what's called parent time with their kids. And so if one of their children has made a mistake, whether that's in regards to pornography or stole a candy bar, whatever it might be, some error or sin or otherwise, if they come in and say, "Mom and Dad, I need some parent time," they'll jump on Mom and Dad's bed and have a conversation.
Yeah.
They come to Dad and say, "Dad, I need some parent time." He'll toss them in the truck. They'll go for a drive. And whatever they share in that time has no consequence from Mom and Dad.
Yeah.
And so it's this, I'm not going to be punished. If I go and sit on Mom and Dad's bed, they're not going to consequence me for stealing the candy bar from the gas station. Now, they might encourage me to make some changes about that and maybe go make some retributions, but they're not going to be the driving force behind that.
Yeah.
And they established that so that their children could come and have open dialogue and without fear of retribution from mom and dad. And I'm so disappointed. I can't believe you've done that. That's not our family. More of a, wow, that's hard. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah.
We're in the bedroom talking about this because you know that there's normally a consequence. If we would have found that out, that there'd be some consequences. What can you do to remedy this? That approach I love because it's one of supportive as this young man or woman explores and develops strength and bridles their passions and desires of their agency.
Yeah.
And when we try to control that too much, they leave the nest and they fail because they don't understand how to bridle their passions and desires. So I love that approach from that parent. It was wonderful.
Yeah, that's so great. And I love what you said earlier about, look, parents, just follow the Spirit, be guided by the Spirit, and you'll know what to do in your family, in your situation.
Well, and also look at how Heavenly Father approaches us.
Yeah.
Heavenly Father is not jumping into my marriage trying to dictate exactly what I say, how I say it, or when I say it. He is giving me the spirit of when I say something wrong, I get to know it left.
Yeah.
He is giving me the spirit of when I do something right, I get a confirmation. And so looking for that in our approaches as a parenting, if we engage our young men or young women in a way where we walk away from that and feel a loss of the spirit, we feel that emptiness, or we know we approached that wrong.
Yeah.
Go back, say, I'm sorry. That was not how I should approach that. And don't say, I'm sorry, but you really messed up this time. Just say, I'm sorry, that's not how I want to approach it. I love you. I hope I'll do better next time. Because they've already heard the riot act.
Yeah.
So owning that behavior and listening to the Spirit is fundamental. That connectivity is...
And then those kids know that I can go to my mom, I can go to my dad, I can go to my parents with this. They're not going to club me over the head.
It creates that open dialogue. And one of the things there's two things I think we do really poorly in our faith.
Yeah.
We talk about sexuality really poorly.
Yes.
And the temple.
Yeah.
Those are two things, and they're both sacred.
Right.
And because of that, sometimes we aren't quite sure how to approach it, but we tend to just do a poor job at it because we don't know what to say, so we don't say.
Yeah.
Right? And so with sexuality, this is an important part of who we are. This is why pornography is so prevalent, is because we're not trying to eliminate your sexual drives. We're trying to help you understand how to bridle them and how to express them in really healthy ways.
Yeah.
I think LDS men and women, when they're married, should have the best sexual lives out there.
Yes.
We have partners for eternity. We're big fans of education. We're big fans of growth. I get questions sometimes of, is this okay in the bedroom? Is this not okay in the bedroom? We're one of the most progressive faiths, I think, in the bedroom that you can come across, because we state it's between husband and wife, and that is, as long as that is comfortable and they're both okay with those behaviors, and that within that context of that relationship, that's okay. Now, some people like to justify and add, well, can I add somebody else to the bedroom? And I go, nope, it's between husband and wife. Can we add some media, some pornography? Can I add that in my bedroom? It spices things up. And I go, I'm not your dad and I'm not your bishop. I'm going to tell you this. The intent of physical intimacy is to connect you. That is the underlying. It's expressed in three different ways. Procreation, which is sacredly joining with God to create life.
Right.
Communication, where you're physically trying to express how you emotionally feel about your partner. And recreation, you're having fun together.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, when we don't have good sexual identities, in our culture, it's a problem. We don't have good sexual identities. We tend to make sex a reward or a punishment. We give it, we take it away, instead of using it as a constant form of connectivity. And it's not, and I don't want to get too graphic, but it's not about the finishing of sex. It's about the connectivity of the process of that whole experience,
right,
of sharing with each other your frustrations. If you don't have an idea or know what sexually is interesting to you with your partner, you don't have a good sexual identity. If I said, what's your fantasy? What's something you like with your partner? I don't want to know, but I'd say I want you to ask yourself the question, what would really turn me on tonight when I got home? If my wife or my husband is doing that, and then share that with your partner and educate yourself. That eternal progression with intimacy is really sacred and important. And Satan takes that and gives us the illusion of intimacy through pornography. And that illusion is that I get to, for a moment, step into that moment of that scene or whatever's or that paragraph that I'm reading, and imagine I'm experiencing a deep connection with somebody that I have no connection with
at all.
It is the bottle I drink from that empties me and doesn't fill me. And so as we approach sexuality in healthy ways, have open conversations that how great sex is with your children. No details. I think that's inappropriate, but saying,
and age appropriate, obviously too.
100%. Yeah. If I had an hour, I could go off an hour just on this topic clearly, but have good conversations. One of my good friends, I ran into Costco about 2 months ago, and he lives in Las Vegas now, and he came up to me. He said, you're younger than me, and he goes, can I just tell you one of the best Sunday school lessons I ever had in church in my youth was by your father. And I said, really? My dad was a very black and white. I never heard him cuss. He never broke. He was
straight down the line, right?
Oh, 100%. And I was not. I was a little bit more off in the bushes. But he was a phenomenal example to me in many ways like that. And he said, I had a lesson. It was about intimacy. We were about 13 or 14. And he looked at the room and said, I want you all to know you should very much look forward to being physically intimate and engaged in sexual behaviors with your eternal partner. It's amazing, exciting, fun, and it's something where you get to explore and have time developing a long-term oneness with your partner. Don't underestimate how important that will be. And he said, it was one of the first times I'd ever heard at church. We didn't talk about it in our home. It was powerful, and it changed my perspective. I always thought intimacy is bad, naughty, until you're married, instead of saying really good and look forward to marriage.
What a great perspective, right? And once again, quoting President Kimball, sex is God ordained, God blessed, God sanctioned, And so, Logan, I see that as another podcast episode on teaching your children about intimacy. This is great. So, probably final question today, but I'll position it this way. So, I have 8 children. All are married now. All are parents, from in their young 20s to their kind of upper 30s. And as we talk to them, one of their concerns is living in this world and raising children in this crazy, toxic world. And it's almost inevitable, right? They feel this inevitability that one of our kids is probably going to be addicted to pornography, and they feel hopeless. And I shouldn't say one. Maybe they feel that that's going to be something that they all have to deal with at some point. But I guess my question is what hope could you give to parents and to people that deal with the addiction, personally? What hope could you give these people today?
If I am a newlywed couple, or I'm a youth and I'm growing up right now, I would say the hope I want to give you and the way I want to inspire you is this: learn how to connect. Learn how to create real, meaningful relationships with your eternal partner, with your friends, and be vulnerable with them. Learn how to take injury from them. The ability to create authentic and pure connection is an insulation against so many mistakes that we make in this life. If you are in the situation where you're a parent and you're having children, create open dialogue, create connection, do meaningful activities together, make mistakes, love the mistakes. When my children make a mistake, I'll say, I guess I like to think about like skateboarding.
Yeah.
When you look at skateboarding competition,
I'm ready for a skateboarding analogy.
Yes.
Right now.
When you're looking at a skateboarding competition, there are some sports in the Olympics where if you don't stick the landing, you don't get points.
Yeah.
Whereas skateboarding, if you go for some epic trick that nobody's ever done before, and you
wipe out,
totally just a yard sale, right? And you get points for that. So I want you to think about that when working with your children and your spouses. Sometimes when they make mistakes, the point of this life is to make the mistakes.
Yeah.
We need the atonement because Heavenly Father knew we were going to come down here to make mistakes. I have people come all the time saying, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And I said, I know you're not. That's the point.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to be good enough. If you're good enough, you wouldn't need the atonement.
Yeah.
You're supposed to learn how to use this agency and this body, these skills, and that is inevitably, inherently going to require making mistakes. Just try not to make the same mistakes over and over again. Try to learn from them. But you beating yourself up, that shaming process is super unhelpful. God uses guilt, not shame. Guilt helps you become aware that you've turned away from the Father, and shame makes you feel like you're never worthy to be in His presence.
Yes.
That is a dangerous differentiation that we need to be clear about. And then when you find yourself as a parent who is struggling with children who are struggling with this, first and foremost, I want you to remember, it's not pornography. Secondly, I want you to remember, your job is not to become an expert in this field and fix them. They're not broken. They need skills.
Yes.
And so turn to your bishop. Turn to your stake president. Turn to a professional and get support and learn how to love them and allow them to work through that process themselves and figure out how to support them, not how to fix them.
Yeah.
Often we're trying to fix. I see people every day change in a way that makes them feel more loved, more whole, more one with their families, with themselves, with their God, with their work environment. And the more we change our approach to this and make it more in line with the Spirit, we will find our outcomes are sanctioned by God.
Yeah. Logan, that's so great. And I love I love the idea of that we've talked about today a little bit too, of just this is our chance to turn to the Savior and have him affect us. And I think we've both seen people in our lives that have done that, right? That they've been through this process, they've turned to Christ, they've received strength and power from him, of course, forgiveness and sanctification. But I remember just recently a bishop called me in my present calling in our stake presidency, and he explained a very complex problem with the family, and he said, I just don't know what to do. He said, do you have any ideas? And I go, no, I have no idea. I don't know what to do either. But Bishop, just go back and turn them to Christ. That's all we can do in this case. It was so heavy that there's nothing a human could do to fix that, but the Savior can. So,
I love that.
Logan, in on our podcast, we love using Brent Barlow's LDS, Let's Do Something. Is there an invitation, something small that you could issue or invite those who are listening today to engage in?
Yes. I would love, if you are married, for you to make it a point to go on weekly dates.
Yeah.
That's something I like to do, and make sure that the weekly date involves at least 15 minutes. It could be, if we're newlywed, we have kids that are in sleep. Our date tonight might be, I got some ice cream at the dairy, the BYU dairy, and we're going to sit on the porch because we have the baby monitor, but we're just going to sit on the porch, have some ice cream, and just talk.
Yeah.
Just uninterrupted time, 15, 20 minutes of talking if we're married, and make that a weekly experience. It could be long dates, it could be short dates, but make sure that your spouse knows on Monday what day of the week they're going to be chosen, and that you're going to be chosen, that this is our time. And that can be subtle night walks, and I appreciate that, but make sure that there's a date night. The second one, for those who are not married, is make it a point to go connect to the Savior. Yeah. So find a time every day for 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes, to get quiet, turn off the radio driving down the road, and just talk with the Lord. Feel that connection, feel that love, and remember that mistakes are part and a necessary part of this experience, and that there's love. We don't need to be worthy to pray. We pray always. Yeah. And those prayers can be answered. I have a firm experience and knowledge of that. But oftentimes we feel like we're not good enough and turn it off from our side of that. So there is hope. Pornography is not the end of a relationship. If you have a partner who's willing to work on things, you have a marriage worth fighting for. Yeah. If you have a child who knows this is a problem, you have somebody that you can work with. As you learn to love and support them and create connectivity, they will thrive with your love.
Yeah, Logan, that's so good. And I love your focus today on connection, because I've always thought that, isolation is what breeds addiction, but connection is what breeds happiness and love and unity.
The opposite of addiction.
Fulfillment.
The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Well, everyone, thank you so much for being with us today. Logan, thank you for being with us. This was wonderful to hear of your expertise in this area. This has been great. We hope to have you back again.
Love to.
So thank you so much. Everyone else, we hope you have a wonderful week. We'll see you next time.